Well, good morning and welcome from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. Welcome to the forum. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy and delight to welcome you to this time in which we explore important issues at the intersection of faith and the modern world. Today, on the birthday of the church, the Feast of Pentecost, we are talking about this parish church in particular and all the great things the Spirit is doing here and the strategic plan we are already embarking on. And with us as our speaker is our own Rector, Bishop Dean Wolfe, to talk about all those things. Welcome, Dean.
Hey, thank you, Peter. I may be joined later by Bill Fry, one of the wardens, or Miriam Schneider, who serves also as a warden here. And I've got Peter, our good vicar, to chime in at points as well. Well, I began my ministry as a licensed minister in the Church of the Brethren. I was 16 years old when I was licensed, so another pastor had a lot more confidence in me than I deserved. I served for about 10 years in that role. I served as an Episcopal priest for 11 years, as an Episcopal bishop for 20 years. I served the presiding bishop, Catherine Jeffert Shorey, and presiding bishop Michael Curry as vice president of the House of Bishops for another 8 years together, represented the Episcopal Church in deliberations with the Archbishop of Canterbury and his staff, and I've represented our denomination at the World Council of Churches at their meeting in Busan, South Korea. Now I'm serving as the rector of this flagship parish in Midtown Manhattan, overseeing a 104-year-old National Historic Landmark church as we complete a $20 million restoration of the parish, the largest in our history.
Your microphone is on in the church.
I think there's no option but to keep the microphone on in the church. So, thank you. So everybody in the church is going to be a part of the forum, whether they wanted to or not. So I oversee on your behalf a preschool, a restaurant and bar, a world-class music program, a gymnasium, a pool, a feeding program serving between 3,000 and 4,000 meals a week, a team of priests offering pastoral care, education, and they're part of a 61-person staff serving a 2,000-some member congregation in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. About 40% of our income is derived from mission-supporting activities, which need to make a profit to support our other ministries. The remaining 60%, we depend upon the contributions of members of the parish and friends of the parish to keep all of our programs going. And yes, we have church sometimes as well in the middle of all that other stuff. A worship schedule of more than 500 services annually and a Christian education, pastoral care, and outreach program that serves the congregation, the city, and the world. And I say all of that to just give you some context for what I'm going to say a little bit later about talking about the future of the church in general and the future of this church in particular. I serve these small churches in the Church of the Brethren, tiny rural congregations in southern Ohio, and later in my ministry in the Episcopal Church, I served as vice rector of the largest Episcopal church in the denomination at the time, St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, Texas. At that time had some 6,000 active members. So I've served Christ in the church for the better part of my life in a wide variety of settings and cultures and contexts. And I want to talk about what I think the future of the church might look like, and then we'll have an opportunity to have some conversation at the end of all this. About 10 years ago, a speaker whose name I can't remember for the life of me spoke to the House of Bishops. All the bishops of the Episcopal Church gathered, and the title of his presentation was called "The Tsunami of Death." He asked us all to picture the average age of our congregants and then to add 20 or 30 years onto them and then to imagine the results. All I can say is the bar was very full at the end of that talk. Now, Phyllis Tickle, who died in 2015 at the age of 81, was an expert in the future of the church. She was an Episcopalian, a writer, a church historian, and she believed that every 500 years the church has a rummage sale, a time in which the old and unuseful ideas are rejected and fresh and meaningful ideas reemerge. Ultimately, the old expression of Christianity is refurbished and revitalized, while a new and more vital form is also created. In her book, The Great Emergence, Tickle argued that Christianity is currently undergoing a massive upheaval as part of this regular pattern that occurs about every 500 years. When she was asked what she thought emergence Christianity meant to the future of denominations, she said, "Religion, not private faith, but religion is sociological and a cultural construct. It does not exist independent of the society in which it occurs. It informs that society and is formed by it. In order for mainline denominations to survive and to thrive, they're going to need to deinstitutionalize." Have you looked lately at the number of Rotary clubs that aren't around anymore, or numbers of Kiwanis clubs that no longer exist, or American Legion posts, or VFW chapters? You may have heard of the book Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community by Robert Putnam, which notes that indeed more people are bowling than ever before, but they just aren't doing it as a part of a league. They aren't doing it in a way that creates stronger relationships with other members of the community. He argued that the loss of social capital in our society is a growing danger in an increasingly polarized culture, and we don't have to look farther than our politics to understand the truth of his observations. In Tickle's theory, institutionalization is being leveled. Protestantism, because it came in a time of growing nation states, became enormously hierarchical. Therefore, the denominational structures that are still standing tend to be hierarchical. She believed that that was not going to work in emergence times, or it's going to have to change its configuration. She thought that people under 40 right now have been born right smack dab into a fully matured emergence, what she called the Great Emergence. And she observed that they can't change their sensibilities any more than they can change the color of their eyes. They're going to lean towards being non-hierarchical. They're going to be wary of authority and institutions. They're going to want to spread out horizontally. They want to be communal. They're going to be actively involved in social justice as they define it, and not in the historically Protestant way of defining it. And they're going to insist on being connected to the whole world because what happens in Palestine or Ukraine or Mexico matters to them. So I'll spare you some stories on the difficulties of denominationalism. I'll just say that Tickle says, and I agree, that denominations are going to have to join forces with each other in the future. Protestantism, whatever else its virtues are or were, is enormously divisive, and that will need to stop. The concordat, which now exists between the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and the Episcopal Church, is positive proof that we can share pulpits and facilities and clergy and parishioners and engage in effective common ministry. That's a real step in the direction that things are going to go in. There's a future out there, I believe, and every mainline denomination, including the Episcopal Church, will need to move into it. Now, I should note that also the Episcopal Church is having substantial conversations with the United Methodist Church as we work how we can do things more collaboratively. Now, I get that some of you may not see the benefits of joining forces with a Midtown Presbyterian or Methodist church, and I get that. You've got to imagine that you're in a small town, maybe upstate, and there are 4 floundering mainline denominations there represented: a Lutheran church, an Episcopal church, maybe a Methodist church, maybe a Presbyterian church. They're all in expensive buildings, and they're all struggling. Then you start to see why we need to be working more closely together. You should know, I assume you do, that we're subsidizing through our diocesan apportionment any number of small, struggling parishes within the Episcopal Diocese of New York, along with a significant diocesan staff. So we may have more skin in this game than you might think. And it isn't a bad thing for larger churches to help smaller churches. But in a couple moments, I'm going to tell you what I think is going to happen. Protestantism has both the tradition of great intellectualism and an understanding among its people that it's all right to ask questions and to do theological investigation. And it has institutions that are already heavily endowed, and emergence Christianity is going to have to deal with some of these very serious and intellectual questions. Imagine this wave hitting shore, this tsunami of death. People getting older, more and more older people not being able to attend church, no longer able to support the church, not as many people being born to Episcopalians. And so you can see pretty easily that there's going to be some fallout. And some of the things that churches have done to overcome that are going to be helpful, but you have to understand that we're working with some serious trends. From 1900 to 1967, the Swiss were the leading watchmakers in the entire world. Nobody made more watches than the Swiss. In 1967, when digital technology was patented, the Swiss rejected it in favor of the traditional ball bearing and gears and mainsprings that they had successfully used in making watches for decades. Unfortunately for the Swiss, the world was ready for this advance, and Seiko, a Japanese company, picked up the digital patent and became the leading watch manufacturer in the world overnight. 50,000 of the 60,000 Swiss watchmakers went out of business because they refused to recognize this new technology. It wasn't until years later that the Swiss caught up and regained their position in the marketplace with the creation of Swatch watches, which took advantage of that new technology. I wonder if there's something here for the Christian faith to learn. Mainline denominations are going to be smaller. That's just a fact. Other expressions of Christianity are going to be smaller as well, but Roman Catholicism, for example, has a large immigrant population with lots of children being born, and that will help them buck the trend. Many churches are going to close. We're seeing it already, and we'll see more church closings in the coming year. Now, that isn't all bad. Retirement isn't a bad thing. A facility that has served its purposes faithfully and well for 50 to 75 years, 100 years, can say it's served its time. We can sell those resources and reinvest them in new communities of faith elsewhere. And some churches are going to grow, either numerically or spiritually or both. Large churches with endowments, like we hope to build at St. Bart's, will become resource parishes for the rest of the church, not unlike small cathedrals. And they'll support a series of smaller satellite communities of faith. Now, understand that my crystal ball isn't any more perfected than anyone else's, but I think there's reasonable consensus that these are some of the trends we're going to be looking at. We've been employing some illogical strategies. You can't continue to burden growing churches with the support of churches who do not make any attempt to remain self-sustaining. And if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. That's something that taught me when I was working in business, and I think it's still true. To put it in a different way, even more bluntly, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. I believe we're going to have to do some things differently, and I believe that involves going back to the future, developing more small groups, prayer circles, Bible studies, reading groups, small support groups, solid teaching, servant leaders, more disciples, and fewer members. More gatherings, fewer buildings. And isn't this how Jesus began? We need to create places where intimate relationships can flourish, not sexually intimate relationships, but deep, profound, intense friendships. Who are the people you can call after midnight? Who will be there for you? And how many of those people are from this congregation? The church will need to be like a reverse Tootsie Roll, sticky on the outside, hard on the inside, easy to become attached to. St. Bart's should be easy to become attached to, but we need to help people to make deeper and deeper commitments to Christ and to the church as they go along. It's not good enough to simply be kind of on the outside edge and never move toward the center. We want to ask more of people who are here. Ask them to make a deeper commitment. Ask them to give of their time, their talent, their treasure. Christians have been given an irrepressible hope. Just to remind us all, the church's purpose throughout history is to serve the faith. The faith doesn't exist to serve the church. The survival of the church is not the objective. Our purpose is not finally to grow, but to be faithful messengers of the good news of Jesus Christ. If we do that, I believe growth will be the natural byproduct of our faithfulness. This passage from Romans 8, I hope, will be read at my funeral. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. No thing, not one thing. We go to church and we think the clergy are sometimes the actors, and we're the discerning audience, seated to be entertained. And God is some sort of cosmic overseer watching from on high. This is worship and faith as a consumer activity. If it amuses us, we attend. If it doesn't, we stay home or simply go somewhere else. In truth, however, Christian churches are called to be communities of faith where the congregation are the actors and God is the audience, the only listener who really matters, and the clergy are stage managers working to help to facilitate the show. So the big deal at St. Bart's is how we will be sustainable, right? I mean, nobody thinks that, gosh, our worship is terrible, our music programs are lousy, we're not offering good services to the wider community, we're not doing outreach. I mean, we can do better in all those areas, but that's not the deal here, right? When I was invited to consider coming to St. Bart's, I was told there are two things you need to do. One, you need to preach, and two, you need to raise money. I'm not sure really that order was what was, intended, but I get it, because we have a national historic landmark church sitting on the most expensive block arguably in the world. Could it be more expensive to run a building than anywhere else than Park Avenue in the middle of New York City? And yet, I think you believe that this building is entrusted to our care as a gift, as a part of our heritage, and that it is an important part of our mission. So, previous groups of people have done the studies and said, should we just, sell St. Bart's, go somewhere else? And the decision was made, and I think it was a wise one. No, we're not going to sell it. You could never get property that has this sort of prominent place in the city, likely ever again. It's hard to imagine how that would happen. So what we're doing now is focusing on how we can be sustainable. This is the challenge that the staff faces. This is the challenge the vestry faces. This is the challenge that sometimes we hide from the congregation, but we need to be more and more transparent. So let's take a look at the plan that we have, the strategic plan that helps us to meet these challenges. We believe that hiring a chief operating officer will help us drive revenue growth of mission-supporting activities and leadership of the staff in this complex environment. It is really important that our mission-supporting activities make a profit. We're not a for-profit, but we need to make profits in those areas, and we need a leader of the business side of the church to focus on that and to do that. Currently, what we ask of wardens is extraordinarily difficult, and not everybody is willing to take that nearly full-time job on. And if we want people to continue to serve in that capacity, we're going to have to change the job description for wardens and for rectors. And we think that hiring an operating officer will help us do that. We're in the process of clarifying job responsibilities of the key staff to ensure alignment, and we're seeking greater efficiency and better performance wherever possible to provide more focus on spiritual and financial growth. We have a preschool. It looks like it makes money for us, but does it really when you assign all the costs that are involved with it? We have an athletic program, a swimming pool, and a gym that we rent out. Can that be leveraged to have greater earnings? We rent space in the church all the time, but of course in COVID it's been harder to do that. How can we be more aggressive about renting space in a way that doesn't cut into our church's identity as a worshiping community? Okay, let's go to the next one. By the way, I can say that we're in the process of interviewing candidates for the chief operating officer. We met the first candidates this week, and I think we're encouraged by the quality of the people that we're seeing. Hire a director of stewardship and development. Check. Jema. We're so glad you're with us, and this was an investment in this position so that we would have greater success. I think that at St. Bart's, stewardship hasn't always been emphasized. We knew that there were some wealthy people in the congregation, and this goes back historically, back to the Vanderbilts. And so I think some people thought, well, as long as we have those people taking care of things, we don't really have an obligation here. And what we know is that yes, we need the money to operate the church, but also people are transformed spiritually by giving. When you give to something, you pay attention to it, you work for it, you think about it, you worry about it, you pray for it. And I think that's a really important part of what we're doing here. We want to enhance spiritual growth and engage the parish more regularly about giving, to add the spiritual component to our giving. And we want to train additional volunteers to assist in stewardship efforts, and we're in the process of calling people. You may be getting a call invited by Jema or the rector or a member of the stewardship committee to help in this process. Growing and diversifying membership is probably the goal of every church anywhere. We want to continue to build our membership and to build a diverse membership. We know one of the ways that happens is by having a diverse staff. We want to, we're in the process of hiring people to support efforts to recruit and retain new members. Zach Nahan, who comes to us from a church who is really good at that in Atlanta, is bringing the skill set that he's been developing over his lifetime and is going to help us out with that. And I think it's going to be, it's going to make a difference to be more fully focused on that. We're revitalizing the new member welcome process, and we're increasing the digital advertising budget. This is a new thing, of course, the realization that we have all of these people who have come to us during the pandemic online. How can we connect them more deeply to this church? How can we get them to give? Some of them already are. Some of them are becoming members really online. That's a whole new world for those of us who were born in the 40s and 50s and can't imagine church membership being anything like that. But we're seeing it. We want to boost parish engagement. People give to what they're engaged with. People volunteer to the things that they are engaged with. So we want to offer additional opportunities. People sometimes say, gee, I've been at St. Bart's, you've got this radical welcome. That's great. I feel very warmly welcomed. But now I've been here a little while and I'd like to meet some people. How can I do that? How can I get connected to some of these neat people I see in worship? I'd like to know them better. We want to offer more opportunities to do that. We're allocating more clergy time to pastoral contact and care, and in a congregation that is growing older, that's going to increasingly be critical to our mission and work. We're also improving our internal systems. We're reviewing our software because we know that in order to really do any of these things, you have to know the names of all the people in your parish. You should know their birth dates. You should know their anniversary dates. You should know their spouses' names, their children's names. You would think we would have all of that? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And so we're going to be working more and more just to get the fundamentals. I used to be, I guess I still am in sales. I used to be in sales for a company that had a prospect list. And you worked off the prospects. We need to develop a prospect list, and we need to be much more careful about caring for the people on our membership rolls. And finally, fully leveraging building and mission supporting activities, developing a long-term building capital expenditure and maintenance plan. This is a church, I've said to the vestry, it's like a petulant child. This building wants what it wants when it wants it. You know, other things keep getting kicked down the line. How we do remuneration of our employees, how we reward excellence, that gets kicked down the road because the HVAC system needs to be repaired, because something desperate is happening all the time and it needs to be worked on. We're trying to get away from this running after one crisis after another and try to approach these things in a much more organized and reasonable manner. We had independent assessments of our business operations, rentals, athletics, cafe, and preschool. Those things need to drive more revenue. We're clear about that. And better align our space usage with our goals. Sorry, there was one more. And then this digital trend, it's more than a trend, it's the way of life. We have a member of the parish who works in real estate. She sends me each month a little email that says, these are things you can do in New York in this month. And it's a great way for her to be in contact with her customers. And I'm thinking, and her potential customers. And I'm thinking, those are the kinds of things that we have done some of and need to do a lot more of. So we're enhancing the website, the social media profiles, and hiring a person that will help do much more video work so that Kara can do much more digital work. Zach also and Peter come of a generation where this is second nature to them. We all watched on staff a TikTok video of the choir at Cambridge University doing a very funny thing in Anglican style, but not any, kind of a contemporary song. And it's got thousands of views, and those are the kinds of things that you can do to attract new people. Why don't I ask Miriam and Bill, do you want to come up and say anything? Pick up the things that I've missed, or Peter? Let's give a hand to the hardest working people in church business here. I would tell you how many hours they spend doing this work, but if I did, none of you would volunteer to be on the vestry or to serve in this capacity.
Well, the first point that I would like to make is to hearken back to something Dean said from the very beginning of his talk, and that is, if you keep on doing the same things, I don't know how this works.
Well, it just started working, I think.
Okay, crazy is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. So the changes that we are implementing that have come about as a result of the strategic plan spearheaded by Bill and worked on diligently by all of the vestry members over the course of the last year is we are implementing changes in how we are going to run the business side of the church to help make our strategic plan effective. And these changes may surprise some people. They may cause some discomfort to some people, but they are absolutely necessary if we're going to drive the results that we need from the changes that we're making.
Do you want to say, because I think it'll be helpful if you use this.
Okay.
That wasn't working very well.
Okay, do I need to use the microphone?
I think the microphone is cutting in and out and not helpful.
Yes, because folks watching online.
Okay. Bill, I'm going to let you.
All right, this is weird. So just kind of to back up a little bit from, and Dean did a great job of presenting the strategic plan, but this, the process is really important. It wasn't, Dean in an alcove over a weekend writing the plan. It was a lot of work that went into it. We had a committee set up of roughly 8 people. We had a whole bunch of meetings. We did a whole bunch of surveys. We interviewed almost everyone on the staff. We looked at what prior vestries had done. We looked at prior studies from vestries. And we, came up with this strategic plan with these 6 initiatives. We had an offsite in October of 2021, and the vestry got together, and discussed all the actions and essentially agreed upon the plan. And from that point on, we've been implementing it as best as possible. A bunch of it you already see with additional clergy, which we were at roughly 2.5 clergy at the time of that meeting. We're up to 4.5 with the plan to increase that depending upon how things go. We're investing in our future with folks like JAMA who came to us, and other positions that Dean and Peter mentioned. So we didn't put out a piece of paper and then admire it from afar. We're implementing it, and there's a bunch of the stuff, things going on now, with the two big efforts right now being a full building assessment, because we have bits and pieces. We have, as Dean mentioned, things break, and we want things to be beautiful. And somehow between those two, we have to have a plan that says these are the likely expenditures over the next 5 to 10 years, and then how do we finance those expenditures? So that's one big thing going on. And the second one that Dean mentioned is our systems, and I think we're operating off of, it's not quite the first version of software ever invented, but maybe it's the third. So they're all disconnected, and people are required to do a lot of administrative things. So that's the second big effort we have ongoing. So I just want folks who are listening and reflecting on this to know the strategy came from a place where lots of people participated, and we are off and running and implementing it. And like anything else big, there are steps forward and there are steps back, and there are things that you have to change. But we're going to keep moving forward on this. And I think Peter's developed a great way to keep people up to date with in the e-news. So that kind of is my main point about kind of a little bit about the process and where we are now.
Thank you, Bill and Miriam. I think one of the things that is interesting, if you look at some previous studies, you see some of the same issues coming up over and over again. It's like systemic to the institution. So some of these things aren't new, like, oh my gosh, we didn't know that was a challenge. This was a challenge in 2009. This was a challenge in 1982. And this is a challenge in 2022, 23. So what we hope is that that we can address these issues in a way that will keep us from following what a number of churches are doing, which is they're kind of experiencing a downward spiral in terms of membership and activity, which leads them to cut program, which leads them to have a further downward spiral in program and activity, and then they cut back even more, and then pretty soon they're not open for business. I would rather be a part of a church that says we're going to take strategic investments and try to make these work in a way that we can increase revenues, increase participation, increase engagement, and over time increase membership. So it's just interesting to watch those two different strategies get played out in churches across the city and around the country. I think let's stop here and give people a chance to ask questions. And Peter, you may already have some. Do we have questions from the gathered community?
We don't yet. I encourage you to submit your questions. You can submit them online using the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook. You can also email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. If you're here in person, you can use all of those things, or you can fill out a question card and hand it to my colleague, Manny Rodriguez-Leach. One question is, how do you see, we talked about digital trends, how do you see them changing, and how do you see St. Bart's changing as a result of our digital presence?
Well, I would say, and we have Kara, we probably could ask her for this question as well. This is becoming, it used to be, wow, we have kind of a digital presence, we have a website, like that was like an additional thing, like, aren't we special? Now, that's just like being in business. Those are the things you need to have, and you need to be depending more and more on your digital presence, particularly if we're going to reach different audiences. And And of course, all churches want to reach a younger audience. If you're going to do that, you're going to need to use the media that they use and use it effectively. The good news about digital communication is that it's comparatively inexpensive. It puts people on kind of an even footing because it's not like we're doing a $5 mailing out to 5,000 people. You need skilled people to operate your digital presence, but it's less expensive than some other forms of communication. It's probably the dream. I'm looking at Greg Harper when I think of previous rectors here. I think Tom would have said this was his dream always, to have an online kind of televised church. And now we're doing that every Sunday and have plans to do even more online production.
If you're in the room and have a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll just repeat it for our online audience.
And importantly, or another important factor in the digital, improving our digital communications, our digital trends, is the trend in online and digital giving. That has become, during COVID, a very important part of our stewardship receipts. And more and more people want to pay that way, or to pledge that way, or to make a gift that way. And so we're improving our technology to make those gifts as seamless as possible and as painless as possible for you to give them. And we're running into some technology issues where the money's coming in, but it's not being receipted or accounted for as timely as we would like, and so that's where we're one of our strategic issues in terms of improving the technology. It's improving technology across the board in communications and in our accounting ability, and that includes making sure we have a cost-effective digital platform to do that in that makes sense to people doing that. And it's not something we can keep doing with what we've had, so we're making improvements on that.
We benefited. Oh, I see a hand up.
Go ahead, Danielle.
You talked about growth of the church and how the population is aging. You mentioned the Roman Catholic Church is growing from immigrant groups with big groups of children. And I'm wondering, in the Episcopal Church, where we have seen growth, what do we know about that growth and where has that come from? Where are we seeing that in the
Where you see growth among children's programs in the Episcopal Church are usually when you've got a critical mass. I once was working in a youth group that had 100 kids, and we went to 200 kids, and I thought it was amazing. It turns out that's the easiest thing in the world, to go from 100 to 200. What was really hard was the next year I had a 15-person youth group, and I spent 2 years trying to get it to 17. There's that dynamic. Parents run this. Parents make the decision as to whether their children are going to be participating in church or not. And it won't come as any surprise to some of you to know that we have many more children in this church than you might guess, but it's not been a priority for parents to bring them to our programming. It may be a priority for them to be at soccer or at camp or at other things, and those all have wonderful benefits. But I would argue, as a rabbi once did with his congregation, he asked the congregation if they thought any of the parents thought their children would become professional athletes. And a couple of people raised their hand, but most did not. He said, do any of you want your children to be ethical people of character formed in a religious tradition? And they all raised their hands. And the rabbi said, well, you're going to have to bring them here for that to happen. Zach, you may want to say something more about this, but it's right now we're kind of starting from zero, and there are some people in this congregation who would say, you know, Dean, just concede it. This is not a church with a lot of young people, not a church with a lot of children, so let's not invest anything in those programs because they don't pay off. And my argument is you can't be a truly great church without programming for children and youth. You can't be. And I think St. Bart's, I think it's in its character to be a great congregation. Not a good congregation, a great congregation. And other people are watching us, and we know that. You know, we're one of 20, 30 churches that people keep an eye on. So it's important.
I believe Robert had a final question.
Robert.
Have you identified a pretty kind of round necessity of revenue and membership that really will enable sustainability? And where are we now compared to where you believe we need to be sustainable?
Yeah. Bill, do you want to answer that, because it's not as crazy as you might think.
The question is there a level of revenue or membership that you have to get to kind of ensure sustainability?
Robert, thanks for asking that. So I'll just kind of cover the financial part of that first, which is a few years ago we sold our air rights, our development rights, and we sold that for quite a bit of money, and we put a lot of that money back into the church. Some of our air rights, we've got quite a bit left. And that's been the source of funding for quite a bit of the church work. Today we have, as we mentioned, we're doing this long-term building plan, and we'll see how much that costs and how much is need to do versus have to do. And we have, as you know, on the investment committee for many years, we have roughly $10 million of funds available to spend on the building. So we're going to try and match the $10 million we have with the long-term plan. Our rough estimate of the long-term plan is it's going to be 2.5 times the amount that we have. And so we're going to have a funding gap that we've got to figure out. We've got lots of air rights to sell. We've got great development work going on. So I think that's the long-term funding part of it. On the short-term funding basis, at our peak, we made about $4.5 million in revenue from our mission supporting activities. That went down to $2.4 million during COVID because we couldn't do most of those activities. We think the potential is roughly $5.5 million of revenue on a normal run rate basis. If we get up to that level, we believe that we can fund not only the growth that we've invested in for the 22 mission plan, but future mission plans, and we can actually sock a little bit of money away to fix some of these building problems that we can't really anticipate. So in terms of numbers, those are the financial numbers. On the membership side, I don't know those numbers. I do know that the primary purpose of all the things we do is spiritual growth. If we have spiritual growth, we should have numeric growth in the same manner. And if we do that, we will have more giving, more commitment, more engagement. And so we're trying to get the financial underpinning and the organizational underpinning, strong enough where we free up clergy and other time for this spiritual growth.
We had consultants give us a tremendous amount of time. Probably may have been worth as much as $300,000 to $400,000 given pro bono because Bill has friends in the business and invited them to help us out. One of the things that they determined was that they thought that another $1 million could be brought out of this building on an annual basis. And if we follow that, if that turns out to be true, that's a long way towards sustainability. $1 million is a lot of money and would make a significant difference. Right now, we're not, we take a certain amount of money, as you know, that is given to us by bequests. People have remembered us in their will. We'd like to put all of that in endowment, but we're not able to do that. So we at the end of the year, pay off the bills with some of that money, and we want to get out of that habit. We know that's not a good thing, but we also are trying to keep everything moving along. If we can increase our revenues by $1 million, boy, that goes a long way, I think.
Unfortunately, we need to stop there unless one of the wardens has a final comment.
You know, and the way to get to $1 million in stewardship on the other side of the equation is 1 million parishioners giving $1 each, or take it down and do the math. So there is a combination of parishioners and dollars that will help us get to our stewardship goal. And ideally, we don't want to be relying on 10 people to give the bulk of our stewardship. We want everyone to be giving as they are able, more equally. So.
Can we just say, just talking among us friends and a few 100,000 other people who have access to this, can we just say that the days of depending on rich people to carry the parish are over? It was a good period of time, but it can't continue like that for two reasons. It's a spiritually bereft practice, and over time, it doesn't work. So everyone is going to have to do their fair share of participating, volunteering, giving, helping. I think that the idea that the clergy here would be spiritual concierges for the community, we need to move beyond that, and I think we want to. Such a privilege to work with all of you, and thank you so much. This is an ongoing conversation, and I'm very happy to have our two wardens and a very committed vestry working on all of this. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We hope you'll join us for Pentecost worship in just a few minutes at 11 a.m. and be back next week for the forum. We'll have a conversation about philanthropy. See you then.